Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for hosting me and offering me the opportunity to say a few words. I've got about half an hour, so I'll try and just stick to some broad themes which I think are important. But I always thought it was always going to be a bad start today, where I woke up feeling hungover. And before you think, actually, I thought you're a good Muslim boy, I am, and I don't drink. But yesterday was Eid, and after my 9th serving of chicken tikka masala, I simply couldn't resist my 10th. So I woke up feeling really groggy, thinking it's awful, and I thought, well, that's no different to my time on the CID, so I'm here. But it's wonderful to be here. I want to talk about certain things to do with extremism, what we mean about extremism, and what I think we need to do to try and deal with it. I think the 3 attacks that we've had in the country so far, or the 4, actually, have impacted upon me personally. For example, when we had in March the Westminster attack, I was in my office at Scotland Yard. I was still serving then, and I saw a rush of people running past my window, and I have seen crowds of people, but this was spontaneous. There was nothing coming over the radio. We didn't really know what was going on, but you could see sheer fear on the faces of people, and they just made their way along the embankment towards away from Westminster Bridge. I led the community response to that and what we called a 14-day plan, which culminated in a 7-day anniversary, and I thought a great gathering at Westminster Cathedral, which was all to do with the church, nothing to do with me, but I thought it was a fitting, healing finish to that. Manchester, I was on call for London, so a commander's always on call, so I had responsibility for on-call issues across the country, and London, and I got the call at home to say that actually there'd been potentially what I heard at that time, because it was all confusing, potentially 3 suicide bombers, which shrapnel, 1 had exploded, and 4 people had been killed. And I remember taking the call in my lounge by my television, and by the time I had walked over to the door to get dressed to go out, I got another call, and London Property being what it was about 4 steps, so it wasn't long. But the point I'm making is actually a second phone call and said, "Sir, 20 people confirmed dead." On my exit from the organisation, I was really humbled to receive many invitations to host dinners in my honour. I was at the Sudanese, a community centre in West London. I'd been out all evening opening my fast with them, and straight after I got into the car, I learnt about London Bridge, and I went straight to work. And the reality here is people have died, parents have lost children, children have lost parents, and this is real. And I think we've got to come out of a space in which we are perhaps reluctant to deal and say the things that need to be said and deal with it. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to challenge it in a way that needs to be challenged to try and enable security and safety that we need. So the question that I'm going to ask is, have we really been in the right place when dealing with extremism? I hear lots of commentators, I hear lots of very credible, very notable people who say that they've actually been into mosques and communities and in social centres, and they've spoken to people, and they've never come across extremism. They've never seen anybody being extremist, heard the voices, heard the language. Well, I would say this: if you're looking to walk into the middle of an attack planning exercise, you're not going to find it. If you're looking to find masking tape, put a bomb together, you're not going to find that. I can tell you, and I was asked a question, that does extremism take place in mosques? I can tell you categorically from the knowledge that I know it does, but I can't go into details, but it does happen. So there's no point denying that. I am Muslim. I am proud to be British Muslim. I am not going to do anything to insult my great religion, but equally we're going to deal with this because my religion teaches me that safety, respect, and human life matters. So what we also need to concentrate is not just on the symptoms, which I think have been what's been occupying our focus and taking away our effort, but trying to get to some of the causes to deal with that. And for that, ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to travel upstream to get into understanding exactly what's going on. You know, this societal membrane that I think that exists, I think it's been infected by harmful and negative beliefs. So at that level where individuals may express a thought and we may think that they've got a right to do that, that's fine. But when a number of those thoughts, ideas, beliefs and nuances start to talk about, and they do, that if you're not Muslim, if you're something different, you're inferior, your moral codes are somehow inferior to yours. So I'm Muslim, you're not. I've got this belief that you're somehow inferior to me. Where actually social mixing with Western people is not encouraged in case it rubs off and influences my own moral standing in the wrong way. Where rights of LGBT communities aren't recognised, where sectarian issues are not encouraged, but certainly recognised, such as the Ahmadiyya community, where there's expressions that they are not Muslims, and I would ask the question, what gives you the right to declare somebody else Muslim or not Muslim? But that's a real issue that we've got, where the equality or inequality of women hasn't been addressed, where Zionist conspiracy theories are pushed and believed, and that leads to anti-Semitic actions. And all of these things taken together, when they're expressed by individuals, that's one thing, but when they become more common than uncommon, and they lie in the ether, and we're not dealing with that, then it's not surprising that the conditions, societal conditions are created within which people feel justified or even gain legitimacy from feeling the way they do. And that's a recipe, I think, which creates or sows the seeds of extremism, and they're not being challenged enough. So, have we been in the right place? Well, that's a good question. And if we haven't been in the right place, if we haven't been going upstream enough, if we've been looking for that attack planning interaction or somebody making the bomb, which we need to anyway, yeah, then we've got to ask the question of why we haven't been in the right place. Is it because we haven't understood it? I don't think so. Is it because perhaps we find, if we're honest, too difficult? Maybe we're going to upset too many people. Maybe it's too sensitive to grasp at that thorny nettle. Or whether there's just a sheer reluctance, or whether or not there are people just stand back and saying, actually, I don't want to associate myself with that. And whatever the reasons are, I don't think that's good enough now, because I do think after Westminster the world has changed, and unless we change to deal with it, I'm not so sure that we're going to be able to get the traction that we need. Because the rate of radicalisation through what I describe as this more common thought and thinking and action in the public psyche provides a greater risk of extremism growing than our efforts to combat it. So there's going to be a gap that's created. And if we are simply focusing and relying upon prevent, then we're not going to be able to deal with the societal psyche that's pushing, inspiring, generating more extremist views. And that's where I think we need to focus our energies and efforts on. I'm not a critic of Prevent. I think it's a good program. I think it's a strong program. I can't understand for the life of me why suddenly it's become the most important issue and one side has to win against the other. You know, I think there's some legitimate concerns communities have about it, and the concerns they express to me are, well, actually, if my son or daughter are engaged by Prevent, does that mean they're going to be stigmatised for the rest of their life? I'd feel the same. We can reassure people around that. People want to also know actually what the criteria is before Prevent is engaged, what the sort of things they're looking at, and we can reassure them. But as for these phrases become toxic, and it's spying, and it somehow undermines Muslim communities, I don't recognise that. And when I've asked the Muslim communities who I've spoken to and said, just help me understand that, explain to me why, the reaction has been just like this, silence. I've not actually got an explanation to that. So it seems a bit hollow, and it seems to be just superficial that they want to attack a programme that exists, that's good, albeit it can be improved. I think going forward, what we need to be able to do is to be able to get into, understand and recognise that actually the common views that I talked about at the beginning do exist, and we need to penetrate that space. But unlike in my police days, we're going to go in with size 10 boots. We're not going to do that. I don't think that's sensible, and I don't think it's going to work. I think we need to be a lot more thoughtful. I think we need to understand the nuances, be analytical, and understand how different communities behave and operate and react. Because one thing is for certain, a universal set of approaches is not going to work when the Muslim community in particular is so denominationally different. There's 16 different sects and denominations of Muslim communities. They all come from different regions of the world. There's 4 schools of thought, which then describe what sort of doctrine you take. And then you get beneath that, playing within that, you get your customs and norms and traditions, which provide a societal structure. So just to say, well, we're going to have a counter narrative and that's going to be solve all our ills. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to work. It's not that simple. I think we can go forward. I think we need help to understand things. And we do have independent advisory group members. We do have our own workforce within our institution who are from that background. We have specialist advisors. But let me also say this. I am pleased with the phrase that we're going to deal with extremism in all its forms, because in all its forms should mean in all its forms. And some of the people I've personally come across in these environments who are either IAG as part of government machinery or even police settings, staff members or specialist advisors actually come from the same school of thought that I think is part of the problem. And it's not easy to detect those. So just be careful as to who's advising who in taking this forward. And I'll come on to this, not trying to be too clever, but I've been a police officer. I had been a police officer nearly 32 years. Protection matters. Saving life is my ethos. That's what I'm made of. Every cop is probably the same. And when we get to a point where people are being killed, and we've had 3 atrocious attacks by Islamist groups, in my view, something different has to take place, and we have to grasp this thorny nettle. And we have to understand how different communities are structured and where they come from. So, for example, my own background, a British-born Pakistani. So the Pakistani community across the country is the biggest population of Muslims in this country. Traditionally, they come from a Barelvi school of thought, which is a bit more relaxed in its interpretation of Islam. Not to say any less devout, but a bit more relaxed, less literal. Unfortunately, the Pakistani community, and it's my own community, hasn't moved beyond the lower rungs of the social ladder. Still live in very deprived conditions, job prospects are poor, educational attainments low, haven't done particularly well compared to other communities. But they do have a strong code of honour. So if you were to go into a Pakistani household, the majority of which are from northwest Pakistan, whilst they have a very relaxed interpretation of Islam, they have a very strong code of honour in terms of how culturally they act. So women will be kept behind doors as a generality. There won't be allowed to do any intermixing between men and women, early teenage marriages, extended families, business within the family fraternity, all of those things. So if I was trying to, just as a way of example, wanted to deal and engage with the Pakistani community to deal with actually the code of honour, and I took the route of trying to explain what Islam meant to them, it would be the wrong route. Because I say I get Islam and Islam, but the two don't cross. But the reason I'm trying to illustrate that is actually you have to have that refined understanding of how communities are to be able to engage with them at that level. And this goes on to, you can talk about the Pakistani community, you can talk about the Bangladeshi community, the majority of which live in this country in Tower Hamlets, the majority of which are from Sylhet. Again, they're from that Barelvi background, but also you see a strong, and this is commentated to me by other people, an Arabanization of them, where you've seen a transform from a more relaxed, liberal to a more conservative way of Islam, and we need to know what's going on in that. different communities such as the Syrian community who want our help, who want to engage, who want tips and who want instruction on how to live life, how to settle, how to engage, how to become good neighbours. The Somalian community, who I work with very closely, understand and are open to, actually we've got issues within our own community, whether they're tribal, whether they're violence, whether it's stabbings or shootings, they get that, FGM, and they are introspectively reflective and they want to do certain things. Point I'm making here is you've got to take different views and approaches into different communities, and we have to take these views to get into those communities to work with them. That difficult personal space in which thought and attitude and custom and history all plays out, we have to get into that as friends, with dignity, with respect, but with the same purpose of safety, security and future well-being. And we've not got into that space in terms of where I think we should be presently. How do we take this all forward then? What are some of the ideas? And I'm very, very mindful of not running out of time. Is I've used the phrase in the last few weeks about mapping extremism across the country. Now, before everybody starts to think shock and horror and we're going to stigmatise communities, and here we are labelling, I'm sure my Twitter's going already now, I can feel something going off about how dare this man say all of this. Well, ask yourselves the question, well, why wouldn't you do that? We've got the ability, we've got the intellect, we've got the experience. Why wouldn't we do that? Or are we simply afraid of what it might tell us? And if people say, well, you can't define extremism, well, I can define the drivers. What makes you more propensible? What makes you more amenable? What are the vulnerability factors? Fancy putting those three together and mapping every single neighbourhood across the country and have a look at who is maybe more predisposed to that way of thinking. Apply on top of that what the social attitude is at the moment, what people are saying in that common space about we're not like you, our moral standing is a bit different, we don't mix, we don't engage with Western people, we keep ourselves to ourselves. You put that together, then suddenly within that you start to have a look at who's maybe prone to all of that. And then you have a look at younger people, people with vulnerability, mental health. You talk about the clashes between intergenerational issues between grandparents, first generation, second generation, third generation, where the third generation is perhaps more confused than I was as a second generation, not relating particularly well to what their parents or grandparents are doing, who are still trying to cling on to what they know is what they're in their home countries, what they left. The new generation looking to get into something else, but perhaps not achieving that. And if failure occurs, where do they reach out to? What is something that's going to give them identity, strength, respect, platform? And I think that what happens there is they spill out into Islam. They grab hold of Islam because at the end of it, we are all Muslims and Islam is really important to us. But the harder strain of Islam, the more pious version, exhibited through my mosque hat, my beard, my way of dress, my hijab. Incidentally, all of those things aren't necessarily requirements, ingredients of Islam, but they become necessary in those social spaces at local level neighbourhoods, which give that appearance of actually my piety, my Islamic beliefs, and how important I am. And you get that, and suddenly you get a following around you, and that becomes your raison d'etre in conditions within which, as I said earlier, perhaps legitimise and justify that you can behave like that, because we are different, we are on the right ladder, we are on the right trajectory, and this is what our purpose in life is. You may have heard me talking about self-regulation of mosques earlier in the last couple of weeks, where again, here comes the state. I never said anything about the state actually. I'm not allowed to talk, I'm not entitled to talk on behalf of the state, but what I said was, how about self-regulation? And this was the point I was trying to make, because more often than not, when I speak to Muslim people and when I've been in a mosque, a lot of the sermons are about actually, you know, when you die, you're going to be held to account, you've got to be a good person, so this is how you get into heaven. So they're talking about the afterlife all the time, which maybe 40 or 50 years ago may have been, you know, in context. But what I'm trying to say, what about talking about your civic responsibility now? What about talking about good citizenship? What about talking about tolerance and respect and valuing each other as human beings, as the great religion of Islam says. What about those things? And incidentally, so we do lose some opportunities, open goals that aren't taken. We did have the Secretary General from the Muslim World League here in London a few weeks ago, and he issued a fatwa. His principal vision is actually to all Muslims a message across the world, and he is from Saudi, but he said, your first and foremost duty to Islam is your loyalty and your service to your country in which you live. How different is that from tones and tenures that I pick up across the country? Places in London, Birmingham, Manchester. And I just think there's an awful lot of opportunity that we can take that simply isn't taken, sometimes because of fear, sometimes because of protest. So as I've said, and I'm not so sure if I'm proud of this or not really, but some of the things I've said, which have been said because I believe in them and I think it's the right thing to do. I may be wrong, but I absolutely agree with this, have attracted a lot of protest and abuse online. And just reflecting on that, I mean, you know, after 32 years as a cop, trust me, yeah, you're going to have to go a long way to abuse me. You're going to have to go a long way before I have a second thought, or I worry in my bed that, oh my God, somebody's called me a name, you know. How many Friday, Saturday nights have I been called absolutely everything, you know? And more recently I was called a pig, and I thought that was new. Yeah, come on, that was a 1980s expression, come on, get with it, you know, you can get something more modern to insult me with, please. But anyway, nonetheless, I did reflect on that, thinking actually, you know, not all Muslims like this. There's some people call it moderate Muslim. I like to call them modern Muslims, where I've sat on mosque floors and they're talking the same language as me. They understand that we resonate, but they would never come out and challenge that for a couple of reasons, I think. Firstly, I think in their own mind, they're disengaged and think that's not us. And secondly, and they go back to work, or they're taking their wife to a theatre, or they book the next holiday, which you can do in Islam, by the way. But the other thing is, even if they decided to, they speak in hushed tones because actually they're fearful, they're intimidated, they get bullied. And I just think that if somebody in my position was intimidated, bullied, and started feeling fear, and I'm Mr. Chishty, not Commander Chishty anymore, but after years of my experience, if I capitulated, then that's going to be the wrong message and example to send to everybody else. Because if I can't stand up to it, then I don't think anybody else will be able to. So I think we do need to map extremism. I've got some ideas how we can do that, but I won't go through all the analytics around that. But you know, having served and led the National Intelligence Model for many years before I came to London, that can be done, and we've got some great analysts. I think we can empower women and men, women and children now. I've called for, actually, why not to kickstart this process and show serious intent on dealing with extremism? Well, why don't we start in our major places of worship, get the boards changed to have 50-50 representation of men and women. Women will bring that diversity. I know that there was severe pressure on Regent Park Mosque 10 years ago to make it a Saudi Arab mosque, and it's not that at all. And they have got women, this multi-denominational, and you see that. You see that in the sermons, you see that in the events that take place, and I think that's a good thing. I think we also need to take a robust approach to Islamic associations. I've been in different arenas and people are giving me feedback where actually it's negative, it's attacking, it's wrong, it's based on the wrong arguments, but it's against the state. And I take personal offence to that because as I was growing up as a young boy, my mum and dad didn't use the words values. I don't think they existed, those words then. But my dad and my dad in particular always talked about actually how great this country was and giving me an opportunity. When you're ill, you get health care and they treat you with respect and they ask if you're okay, sir, and they ask about your family at home. I thought it was really nice. These things stuck with me. Again, education, I can take advantage of an education system. You know, you get all these virtues and it comes with normally a glad hand and a smile. And I just think, my personal view, I think it's really insulting to denigrate that and not respect it. So when the extremism strategy was launched, I think it was October 15, when it was launched, there was one Muslim group that described it as being based on some sort of fuzzy notions of British values. Well, they could have said anything about this strategy and I would have taken the feedback. But I was really quite insulted, hurt. That actually one thing that's not fuzzy is our British values. They never have been. In fact, if anything, we set the tone, in my opinion, for the moral compass for the rest of the world. We do that. Policing certainly has taught me that. I do think that there could be a regulatory framework for consistency of what's taught in mosques, for sermons. We can have the same message going across the country. You need different tools to do that. But you imagine a world where every week you have the same message going out, irrespective of whether you're a Wahhabi or a Salafi or a Sufi or whoever, and you're getting the same messages. How impactful would that be? How important would that be? Especially coming from figures who are perceived to be in authoritative in positions. And the only thing stopping us from doing that is a little bit of coordination. But that can be done. People are attuned to that idea. And the last thing I just want to finish off is, and I've been approached several times about this, is, and I haven't done it for practical reasons just yet, is people want to show that they're British, that they're Muslim, and they want to come out. And they want a Muslim-led march to take place across the country together. And it's not just going to be Muslim people, it's going to be all people. And I really like the idea of that, is because when people talk about foreign policy, let's not forget 1 million people marched against the war in Iraq. And many of those Muslim people, many of those people in that million-man march at that stage were not Muslims. So there's a lot more between us than against us. And I'll finish on this point, and on cue is Louise, and a great fan. I thought your reporting, your analysis was absolutely spot on, but the heart of which what I really took away was one sentiment, and it takes it back to communities. You describe, and I totally agree with you, Louise, is actually every generation is like the first generation. If you just stop and pause and think about that, means some communities just have not progressed, advanced, integrated. And in 2017, I don't think it's acceptable. Coming in the 60s, you can maybe understand it. But even for their life chances, better health, better quality, that needs to occur. Thank you very much.